The scent of rust and rain-soaked earth was the first thing that hit him, the smell of things forgotten and left to decay. In the junkyard, a graveyard of ambitions and broken machinery on the outskirts of Havenwood, Georgia, Corporal Caleb Stone saw a sight that froze the blood in his veins. This is a story about being thrown away by the world and the profound courage it takes to claim your own worth. If you believe in our mission to unearth these stories of courage, consider supporting us with a super thanks. And if you already stand with Elara, leave a "Stay strong, Elara" in the comments below. The year was 1946. Caleb had come home from the war in Europe with a chest full of medals and a soul full of a quiet, weary silence that the noisy, bustling peace of post-war America couldn't seem to penetrate. He had commanded a tank in the 761st Battalion, a roaring beast of American steel, and had helped to liberate a continent from a tyrant. But back home, the uniform that had made him a hero overseas now only served to make him a more visible target for a different, more insidious kind of tyranny. He was a black man in a world that had not yet decided if he was a citizen or a problem, a world that celebrated his sacrifice in parades but denied him a decent job. He was on a pilgrimage, a long, solitary drive south to visit the grave of a friend who had fallen in the Ardennes forest, a promise he had made in the frozen mud of a foxhole as he held the boy's hand. His car, a tired but faithful 1938 Ford Coupe he had painstakingly rebuilt himself, had chosen this desolate stretch of Georgia road, miles from anywhere, to finally give up the ghost, its fuel pump sighing its last with a sad metallic gasp. The junkyard seemed like his only hope for a part. It was a sprawling, chaotic place, a 10-acre testament to 100 broken dreams. Tractors with seized engines sat like ancient rusted skeletons, cars with shattered windshields stared with vacant glassy eyes, and great, mountainous piles of scrap metal wept orange tears of rust onto the red Georgia clay. The sign over the gate, its letters faded and peeling, read "Vance and Sons Salvage." As Caleb walked through the gate, a profound, almost hostile silence greeted him, the only sound the sighing of the wind through the skeletal remains of a rusted-out bus. He was navigating a narrow canyon between a wall of flattened cars and a pile of discarded farm equipment, his eyes scanning for the familiar shape of a Ford V8 engine block when he heard it. It was a soft sound, almost lost in the creaking of the wind against the scrap. It was the sound of a woman's quiet, desperate, and utterly exhausted sob. His soldier's instincts, honed by years of listening for the subtle, telltale sounds of danger in a silent forest, kicked in immediately. He moved slowly, silently, through the canyons of scrap, his body low, his senses on high, painful alert. And then he saw her. In the center of the junkyard stood a large, open-sided sorting shed, its corrugated tin roof held up by thick, creosote-blackened telephone poles. And tied to the central pillar she was there. Her wrists were bound together with a thick, coarse rope, pulled taut above her head and looped around the pole, forcing her into a strained, agonizing position. She was a young woman, perhaps in her mid-20s, with a cascade of dark, tangled hair that fell across her face. Her simple cotton dress was torn at the shoulder, revealing a raw, angry-looking rope burn. Her face was pale and smudged with dirt, but as she lifted her head, her features were set in a mask of such fierce, unyielding pride that it took his breath away. Her eyes, when they flickered open and saw him standing in the shadows, were not pleading or broken. They were defiant. Before he could speak, before his mind could even fully process the sheer, brutal wrongness of the scene, he heard the sound of an approaching truck, its engine a low, gravelly rumble. A heavy-duty flatbed truck pulled up to the shed, and two men climbed out. They were big, hard-looking men in their 30s, their faces set in the sullen, arrogant lines of men who have never had their physical power questioned. They were followed by an older man who emerged from the passenger side. He was tall and ramrod straight, perhaps in his late 60s, with a severe patriarchal face and eyes as cold and grey as a winter sky. He was dressed in the simple, clean work clothes of a landowner, and he carried himself with an air of absolute, unquestionable authority that seemed to suck the very oxygen from the air. The woman tied to the post visibly stiffened at the sight of him, her defiance hardening into a mask of pure, cold hatred. "Had enough of the sun, daughter," the old man said, his voice not loud, but carrying a heavy, oppressive weight that seemed to crush the silence. "Are you ready to be reasonable? Are you ready to sign the papers and stop this foolishness?" "I will never sign them," the woman said, her voice a low, ragged whisper, but each word was a piece of iron. "The land is mine. It was my husband's. It's for my son. You will not steal it from him. Not now. Not ever." "It is Vance land," the old man stated, the words a final, immutable judgment, a law unto themselves. "It has been Vance land for 100 years. It will not be sold off to strangers to pay for your foolish city notions. You are a Vance now. You will do your duty to this family, or you will rot here until you remember who you are." It was then that he saw Caleb, a dark, silent figure standing in the deep shadows at the edge of the shed. The old man's cold eyes narrowed, dismissing him in an instant. "This is private property, boy," he said, the racial slur a casual, reflexive instrument of power. "You're trespassing." Caleb slowly, deliberately stepped out of the shadows and into the dusty, sunlit space of the shed. He did not look at the two younger men who had turned to face him, their hands instinctively clenching into fists. He looked at the old man, and he looked at the woman tied to the post, a silent, powerful acknowledgement of her presence, of her humanity. "I was just looking for a fuel pump for my car," he said, his voice calm, steady, the voice of a non-commissioned officer who had faced down German tanks and was not about to be intimidated by a junkyard bully. "But it seems I've stumbled into some kind of family disagreement. This is not your concern," the old man said, his voice dropping to a low, menacing growl. "You will turn around, you will walk out of that gate, and you will forget everything you have seen here. This is a family matter." "Tying a woman to a post," Caleb said, his gaze unwavering, his eyes meeting the old man's with a force that seemed to surprise him, "stops being a family matter and starts being a crime. I saw a lot of things over in Europe, old man. I saw men who thought they were a law unto themselves, who thought they could do whatever they wanted to other human beings. It never ends well for them." The two younger men took a threatening step forward, their expressions murderous. But the old man held up a hand, stopping them. He studied Caleb, a flicker of something, surprise, grudging respect, in his cold, calculating eyes. He saw not a frightened, subservient field hand, but a soldier, a man who knew how to stand his ground, a man with a core of steel. "You are a long way from home, soldier," the old man said, the word soldier now a new kind of threat, a reminder of Caleb's outsider status. "And you are in a place where that uniform you used to wear does not grant you any authority. I am giving you one and only one chance to walk away from this with your health intact." Caleb knew he was in mortal danger. He was one man against three. He was in a lawless place, miles from anywhere, a place where a black man's life was worth less than the scrap metal that surrounded them. He could walk away. He could get back on the road, find another fuel pump somewhere, and leave this woman to her terrible fate. It was not his fight, but as he looked at her, at the raw, fierce, and unbroken courage in her eyes, he saw the same look he had seen in the eyes of the French resistance fighters who had hidden him from the Gestapo. He saw the same look he had seen in the faces of the concentration camp survivors he had helped to liberate. It was the look of the human spirit refusing to be broken, refusing to surrender, and he knew with a certainty that was as deep and as solid as the bones in his body that he could not walk away. He was a soldier, and his war, he was beginning to realize with a deep, weary and profound sense of clarity, was not over. He gave a slow, deliberate nod, as if in agreement. "All right then," he said, his voice still calm, but with a new, hard edge to it that only a fellow soldier would recognize. "I'll be on my way." He turned his back on them, a calculated disarming gesture, and began to walk slowly toward the gate. The two younger men relaxed, sneering at his cowardice. The old man watched him, his eyes narrowed, still suspicious. Caleb did not look back. He walked out of the gate and onto the deserted road. He did not get in his car. He walked down the road, around a bend, and out of sight. And then he melted into the deep woods that lined the road, his movements silent, purposeful, a predator in a forest he now understood. With a GR, Caleb moved through the dense, humid Georgia pines with a practiced, ghostly silence that belied his large frame. The oppressive heat of the afternoon seemed to press down on him, thick with the scent of pine needles and damp earth. The uniform might be packed away in a footlocker back in his rented room, but the soldier remained, every nerve ending humming with a familiar, cold and brilliant clarity. He was in hostile territory, outnumbered, and his objective was clear. His mind, honed by years of combat and survival training in the frozen forests of the Ardennes, shifted into a state of high alert. He was not just a man anymore. He was a mission. Objective: liberate the prisoner. He circled back toward the sprawling, chaotic junkyard, approaching it from the rear, a direction he knew they would not expect. A high, dilapidated fence of corrugated tin and rusted barbed wire marked the boundary, a pathetic attempt to contain the sprawling decay within. He found a spot where the rust had eaten clean through a sheet of tin, creating a narrow, jagged opening near the ground. He slipped through, his movements fluid and economical, and was back inside the graveyard of machines, a silent, avenging ghost in their midst. From the deep cover of a mountain of scrap metal, a tangled mess of old bed springs and shattered engine blocks, he set up his observation post. He had a clear, if distant, line of sight to the sorting shed. The two younger men, whom he now assumed were the sons from the faded sign, Jed and Luke, he would later learn, were sitting on the tailgate of their flatbed truck. They had produced a bottle of corn whiskey and were passing it back and forth, their casual, brutal authority a testament to a lifetime of unquestioned physical dominance. Their laughter, a harsh, ugly sound that echoed in the quiet afternoon, grated on Caleb's nerves. The old man, Arthur Vance, was pacing in front of the woman, his voice a low, relentless murmur, a psychological siege designed to wear her down, to break her will through sheer, monotonous, patriarchal pressure. Caleb knew a direct physical assault was suicide. They were 3 to his 1. They were on their home turf, and they were the kind of men who would not hesitate to use lethal force. He needed a diversion, a powerful, chaotic event that would draw the two younger, more dangerous men away from the shed, leaving the old man vulnerable. He scanned his surroundings, his eyes not seeing junk, but an arsenal of improvised weapons and tactical opportunities. He saw a stack of old, dry tires, their rubber cracked and brittle from years in the sun. He saw a rusted 55-gallon drum, its side stenciled with a faded but still legible warning: flammable, keep away from heat. And he saw a tangle of old, insulated copper wire snaking its way through a pile of discarded electrical equipment. A plan began to form in his mind, a risky, audacious, and potentially deadly piece of battlefield improvisation. He needed to create a fire, a big one, something that would create enough smoke and panic to seem like a genuine, accidental threat to their precious, ugly kingdom of scrap. He moved silently, a ghost in the labyrinth of rust, gathering the components for his device. He found a half-full can of gasoline in the cab of a wrecked 1930s pickup truck. It smelled a sharp, welcome promise of combustion. He had a book of matches in his own pocket. It was a habit he had picked up in the war, a small, quiet act of rebellion against the army's obsession with clean living and a constant, comforting ritual in the face of chaos. Tonight, that small vice would be his salvation. He made his way to a far corner of the junkie yard, a place that was a good 100 yards downwind from the shed, but still clearly visible from it. He piled the dry, cracked tires into a high, unstable heap. He carefully poured the contents of the gasoline can over the pile, ensuring the fuel soaked deep into the brittle rubber. And then, with the patient, meticulous skill of a demolitions expert, he set up his trigger. He ran a long length of the copper wire from the pile of tires to a spot 50 yards away, behind the skeletal, burned-out shell of an old school bus. He stripped the insulation from both ends of the wire with his pocket knife. He threaded one end deep into the gasoline-soaked tires. The other end he connected to the positive terminal of an old heavy-duty car battery he had located, leaving the final connection to the negative terminal loose, a simple, effective, and highly dangerous remote detonator. He was ready. He settled in behind the rusted hulk of the school bus, his heart a steady, disciplined drumbeat, his breathing slow and even. He was a soldier in his hide, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. He watched the shed. The old man was still talking, his voice a relentless, monotonous drone, a weapon of psychological attrition. The woman was still hanging there, her head now bowed in what looked like exhaustion, a statue of a grief and defiance that was almost too painful to watch. The two sons were getting louder, the whiskey making them bold and careless. It was time. He took a deep, steadying breath, the smell of rust and decay filling his lungs. And with a single decisive movement, he touched the bare end of the wire to the negative battery terminal. A single, bright, electric blue spark jumped from the wire to the lead. 100 yards away, the gasoline-soaked tires erupted in a sudden, violent whoosh of flame, a sound like a great angry beast taking a sudden breath. A thick, oily and impenetrable column of black smoke instantly billowed into the clear Georgia sky, a signal of chaos that could be seen for miles. The effect was instantaneous and exactly as he had planned. The two younger men jumped to their feet, their drunken stupor vanishing in a flash of adrenaline, their faces a mixture of surprise and genuine alarm. "What the hell was that?" one of them shouted, his voice a panicked bark. "It's a fire, you idiots!" the old man snarled, his attention finally, violently torn from his prisoner. He pointed a trembling, imperious finger toward the rising column of smoke. "The tires! Get over there! Put it out before it burns the whole damn place down! That's $1,000 of rubber!" His first thought, even in a crisis, was of money. The two sons, spurred to action by their father's command and the threat to their inventory, scrambled into their flatbed truck. The engine roared to life, and the truck tore off across the junkyard toward the fire, leaving a cloud of dust in its wake. They had taken the bait. The old man and the woman were now alone in the shed. This was Caleb's chance. He moved fast and silent from the cover of the bus, circling around the back of the sorting shed. He came up behind the old man who was standing at the edge of the shed, staring mesmerized at the fire, his back completely exposed. Caleb was not a killer. He was a soldier, a liberator, but he was also a pragmatist. He had seen too much of the world to believe in half measures. He picked up a heavy, grease-caked wrench that was lying on a nearby workbench. It felt solid, balanced, and deeply, brutally effective in his hand. He moved up behind the old man, silent as the shadow that was creeping across the floor, and with a single, swift and brutally efficient blow, he struck him at the base of the skull. The old man crumpled to the ground without a sound, a silent, sudden, and deeply satisfying collapse of his rigid, patriarchal authority. Caleb was at the woman's side in an instant. He pulled out his pocket knife, the same simple army-issue knife he had used to cut his way out of 100 battlefield entanglements, and with two quick, expert slices, he severed the thick, coarse ropes that bound her wrists. She collapsed forward, her body a dead weight, the last of her defiant strength finally, completely giving out. He caught her, his arms a strong, steady circle of protection around her. Her wrists were raw and bleeding, her arms a latticework of angry red rope burns that would surely become deep, purple bruises. "Can you walk?" he asked, his voice a low, urgent whisper. She nodded, her face buried in the rough, clean fabric of his shirt, her body racked with a series of deep, shuddering sobs, the first tears she had allowed herself to shed in what felt like a lifetime. "My name is Caleb," he said, his arms holding her, a silent promise of safety in a world that had shown her none. "I'm going to get you out of here." "Ilara," she whispered, her voice muffled by his shirt, the name a small, fragile, and beautiful thing in the ugly, chaotic world of the junkyard. He helped her to her feet. She was weak, her legs unsteady from the long hours of being bound, but her will, he could see, was a fire that had not been extinguished. It had only been banked. Leaning on him, her arm around his shoulders, she began the slow, painful walk out of the shed, out of her prison. They did not go toward the main gate. That was the path of the enemy. He led her toward the back of the junkyard, toward the jagged gap in the fence he had used to enter. As they moved through the maze of scrap, the sound of the burning tires was a raging, triumphant symphony in the background. The thick, black smoke, a protective curtain that shielded their escape from any prying eyes. They reached the fence, and he helped her through the opening, his hands gentle as he guided her past the sharp, rusted metal. They were out. They were in the woods, in the deep, anonymous and blessed safety of the pines. They could hear the shouts from the junkyard now, the sound of the two sons, having realized the fire was a diversion, returning to the shed, their voices a mixture of confusion and then a dawning, murderous rage as they discovered their father unconscious and their prisoner gone. The hunt, Caleb knew, would begin soon. "My car is just down the road," he said. "It's broken down, but we can hide there for now. They won't think to look for us so close to the road." They made their way with a slow, painful urgency to his old Ford coupe, a small dark island of normalcy in a world that had gone insane. He settled her into the passenger seat, and for the first time, he got a good, clear look at her in the fading light of the afternoon. Her face was smudged with dirt and streaked with tears, but it was a face of a fierce, classical beauty, with high cheekbones and eyes the color of a stormy sea. And in those eyes, he saw not just gratitude, not just fear, but a deep, unyielding strength that resonated with something deep inside his own soul. "They won't stop," she said, her voice a low, raw whisper that was full of a terrible, certain knowledge. "My father-in-law, Arthur, he is not a man who forgives. He is a man who destroys anything he cannot control. He will hunt us." "Let him," Caleb said, his voice a low, grim rumble that was more of a promise than a boast. "I've been hunted by better men than him." He opened the glove compartment of his car and pulled out a heavy, oilcloth-wrapped package. He unwrapped it with slow, deliberate movements. It was his service pistol, a Colt 45, the one sacred and deeply illegal totem of his old life that he had refused to give up. He checked the clip. It was full. He was no longer an unarmed man in a hostile land. "My son," she said suddenly, her eyes wide with a new, dawning horror that eclipsed her own pain. "Oh, God. Thomas, he's at the house. They have my son." The words hit Caleb with the force of a physical blow, a piece of shrapnel to the gut. A child. There was a child involved. The stakes of this desperate, improvised, and already deadly battle had just been raised to an unbearable, impossible level. He was no longer just liberating a prisoner. He was now on a mission to rescue a hostage. "The house?" he asked, his mind already shifting, recalibrating, a new, colder, and far more dangerous plan beginning to form. "Where is the house?" "It's the old Vance homestead," she said, her voice trembling with a new, raw, and terrifying urgency. "It's about 5 miles from here. It's a fortress. The whole family lives there. My father-in-law, his 2 sons, their wives. They took my son from me this morning. They said I would not see him again until I signed the papers." The full, monstrous, and almost medieval cruelty of the Vance family was now laid bare. This was not just a dispute over land or money. This was about power, about the absolute patriarchal control of a clan that saw its women and its children as property, as pawns in their dynastic games. They were not just bullies, they were tyrants, ruling over their own small, isolated, and lawless kingdom. Caleb looked at Ilara, at the raw maternal terror that was blazing in her eyes. He had a choice. A clear and logical choice. He could take her and run. He could get the car started somehow and drive south, get her to a city, to the authorities, and leave the boy to his fate. It would be the smart thing to do. It would be the sane thing to do. But he was a soldier, and his war had just been given a new and absolute objective. You do not leave a man behind, and you do not, under any circumstances, leave a child in the hands of the enemy. "All right then," he said, his voice calm, his decision made. He tucked the heavy black pistol into the waistband of his trousers, a cold, solid, and deeply reassuring weight against his skin. "It seems we're not done fighting for the day." He looked at her, and his eyes, in the gathering twilight, were full of a quiet, deadly seriousness. "Tell me everything you know about that fortress." The Vance homestead, as Ilara described it in a low, urgent torrent of words, was not a house. It was a physical manifestation of a dynasty's power, a brick and timber fortress built to withstand the ravages of time, of progress, and of any challenge to the family's absolute, unquestioned authority. It stood on a low, commanding hill, surrounded by 100 acres of prime Georgia farmland, a self-contained kingdom with its own fields, its own workshops, its own brutal, unwritten laws. The main house was a sprawling, two-story structure of dark, weathered brick and heavy timbers, built a century ago by the first Vance to stake his claim in this part of the state, and it had been added to and fortified by each succeeding generation, becoming a labyrinth of wings and porches and secret, forgotten rooms. A high, formidable stone wall, overgrown with a century's worth of possessive, clinging ivy, surrounded the immediate grounds, a clear, formidable demarcation between the world of the Vances and the world of ordinary men. Ilara, sitting in the passenger seat of Caleb's silent, broken-down car, the twilight deepening around them into a thick, humid darkness, sketched a map on the back of an old, crumpled receipt from her pocket. Her hand, which had been trembling just a few minutes before, was now surprisingly steady. Her fear for her son, Thomas, was a sharp, physical agony, but it was also a clarifying, focusing force. She was no longer a victim, a prisoner. She was a soldier, an intelligence officer, briefing her commander for the most important and most desperate mission of their lives. She drew the layout of the house from a memory that was as sharp and as painful as a shard of glass. She marked the rooms, the windows, the doors. She marked the small private family chapel where her husband Daniel, the one Vance who had tried to be a good and gentle man, was buried. She marked the barns, the smokehouse, the separate smaller houses where her two brothers-in-law, the brutish Jed and the cunning Luke, lived with their own silent, subservient families. And she marked the room where she knew with a mother's terrible, certain instinct they would be keeping her son, a small, locked bedroom on the second floor of the main house, a room that had once been used as a nursery, its one window now covered with a heavy, decorative but brutally effective iron grille. "My father-in-law Arthur," she said, her voice a low, intense whisper that was almost a hiss. "He is a man of routine, of ritual. He is a creature of absolute, unvarying habit. It is his strength and his weakness. After supper every night at precisely 8 o'clock, he and his sons go to the study, a room on the ground floor at the back of the house, to drink brandy and to conduct the family business. They will be there for at least 2 hours. It is the one time of the day when the house is not vigilant. It is the time when the king is in his counting house and his guard is down." Caleb studied the crude but detailed map, his mind absorbing the details, processing the tactical information. This was the kind of intelligence that a soldier dreamed of, a precise, predictable pattern in the enemy's behavior. "The guards," he said, "the two men from the junkyard, Jed and Luke, where will they be?" "In the study with their father," she said. "It is a requirement. He is the king, and they are his princes, his loyal and stupid enforcers. They attend him. It is a part of the ritual." "And their wives? The other women in the house? In their own homes, with their own children," she said, a note of bitter, weary, and deeply ingrained contempt in her voice. "They are Vance women. They have been trained since birth to know their place. They see everything, they hear everything, but they say nothing. They are prisoners too, of a different, more comfortable kind." So the enemy would be concentrated, predictable, their attention focused inward on their own nightly ritual of power and self-congratulation. The fortress, for a brief 2-hour window, would have a point of vulnerability. The plan that began to form in Caleb's mind was one of breathtaking audacity, a plan that relied on speed, on surprise, and on a deep, psychological understanding of the arrogant, overconfident enemy. "We are not going to storm the castle, Ilara," he said, his voice quiet and firm, a stark contrast to the chaos and the terror of their situation. "We are not going to fight our way in. We are going to walk in the front door, And you," he looked at her, his gaze intense, "are going to be the one to open it for me." Her eyes widened in a mixture of fear and utter disbelief. "Walk in the front door. Caleb, they will kill us before we take 2 steps." "No, they won't," he said, his gaze steady, confident, a transmission of his own iron-willed belief in the plan. "Because you are not going to walk in there as a warrior. You are going to go back there as a defeated woman. You are going to crawl back to them. You are going to tell them that you have had enough, that you are broken, that you are ready to be reasonable. You are going to tell them that you will sign the papers. You will give them the one thing in the world they want. And in the moment of their triumph, in the moment when their arrogance and their pride have made them blind and deaf to everything else, that is when we will strike." It was a plan that was as much a piece of theater as it was a military operation. It was a Trojan horse strategy, a piece of brilliant psychological warfare. But it required Ilara to find a strength she did not know she possessed, to walk back into the lion's den, to face the men who had just tortured her, and to lie to them with a conviction that would be utterly, completely, and flawlessly believable. "I don't know if I can do it," she whispered, her voice trembling, the memory of the ropes, of the sun, of her father-in-law's cold, dead eyes, a fresh, raw wound. "Yes, you can," he said, his hand covering hers, his touch not gentle but firm, a small, powerful and deeply respectful anchor of strength. "You are the bravest woman I have ever met. You hung on that post for 6 hours and you did not break. You can do this. You will do this for your son." And in his eyes, in his absolute, unshakable faith in her, a faith that she did not even have in herself, she found the courage she needed. But their planning was cut short by the sweep of headlights down the main road. They both ducked down instinctively, their heads below the level of the windows. It was the Vance truck, roaring away from the junkyard, heading back toward the homestead. The fire, Caleb surmised, had either burned itself out or they had given up on it. Their attention now turned to finding their escaped prisoner. "They're starting the hunt," Caleb said, his voice a low, grim whisper. "We need to get this car moving, and we need to do it now." He popped the hood of the Ford, his movements swift and professional. "Keep a lookout," he said to Ilara. "Tell me if you see anything." Ilara, her heart pounding, peered over the dashboard, her eyes scanning the dark, empty road. The silence, now that the truck had passed, was heavy, menacing. Caleb was not just a soldier, he was a master mechanic, a man who had kept the complex, temperamental engines of Sherman tanks running in the frozen mud of Belgium. A simple Ford V8, even one as old and as neglected as this one, was a puzzle he knew how to solve. He had the part he needed, the fuel pump he had come for in the first place, tucked in his jacket pocket. He had snatched it from a wrecked coupe in the junkyard in the moments before he had staged his diversion. It was an act of foresight, of a soldier's instinct to always secure his own equipment before entering a battle. He worked by the faint, diffuse light of the moon, his hands moving with a surgeon's precision, his sense of touch telling him everything his eyes could not. He felt the cold, greasy metal of the engine block, the familiar shapes of the bolts, the fuel lines. He worked in a state of intense, focused concentration, his mind a quiet, orderly place in the midst of a world of chaos. "Tell me about the land," he said as he worked, his voice a low, steady murmur in the darkness, a way of keeping both of them focused, of pushing back the encroaching fear. "Why do they want it so badly? It's just 100 acres. "It's not just the land," Ilara said, her eyes still scanning the road. "It's what's in it. My husband Daniel, he was different from his father and his brothers. He was not a brute. He was a dreamer. He was a student of the earth. He had studied agriculture at the university before his father forced him to come home. He believed that the Vance family's way of farming, their obsession with cotton and tobacco, was killing the land, was poisoning it with chemicals. He had his own ideas." She paused. The memory of her husband, of his gentle, hopeful spirit, a painful, beautiful ache in her heart. "On his 100 acres, she continued, the land his own mother had left him, a small rebellion against her husband's absolute control. He found something, a spring, a natural spring, with water that was cleaner and purer than any in the county, and below it, a deep, rich deposit of kaolin clay, a very fine, very pure deposit. He said it was the best in the state. He had it tested rested. He had plans. He was going to start a small independent pottery. He was going to make beautiful things, not just tear things out of the ground. It was going to be our escape, our future, a life away from his father. Caleb stopped his work for a moment, the significance of what she was saying dawning on him. A pure source of kaolin clay. He was not a potter, but he was an engineer. He knew that kaolin was not just for pottery. It was a valuable industrial mineral used in the manufacturing of paper, of paint, of ceramics, of 100 other things. A large, pure deposit could be worth a fortune. Does Arthur know? He asked. Daniel told him, she said, her voice bitter. He was so excited. He wanted his father's blessing. He thought his father would be proud. But Arthur, he just saw the money. He saw a resource that was not under his control. He forbade Daniel from pursuing it. He said it was Vance land and its resources belonged to the family, to be exploited for the good of the family, which meant for his own profit. That was the beginning of their final fight, and then Daniel had his accident. The word accident hung in the air, heavy with a new and terrible meaning. Her husband's death, a fall from a high barn loft, had been ruled an accident. But now, in the light of everything she had seen, of the family's brutal, casual violence, a new, sickening suspicion began to take root in her mind. Before she could voice it, a new set of headlights appeared on the road, coming from the direction of the town. A car, she whispered, her voice tight with panic. Get down, Caleb commanded. They both ducked below the windows again, their bodies pressed against the cold, worn upholstery of the car. The headlights grew brighter, closer. The car slowed as it approached the junkyard. It was a police car, a sheriff's deputy, Arthur Vance's man. The car idled for a moment by the junkyard gate, its spotlight sweeping over the still smoldering pile of tires, and then, slowly, it continued on, heading toward the Vance homestead. He's called in the law, Caleb said, his voice a low, grim whisper. He's twisting the story. He'll say we're thieves, that we assaulted him. He's turning us from the victims into the criminals. He worked faster now, his fingers a blur of efficient, desperate motion. He seated the new fuel pump. He reconnected the lines. He tightened the bolts with a final, furious series of twists. That's it, he said. Now, we pray. He slid into the driver's seat, the smell of gasoline and his own sweat filling the small, confined space. He turned the key. The engine groaned, a long, painful, protesting sound. It turned over, but it did not catch. Come on, baby, he whispered to the machine, his voice a quiet, desperate plea. Come on. He turned the key again. The engine groaned. It coughed, it sputtered, and then with a roar that was the most beautiful, most triumphant sound in the world, it caught. The old Ford V8 roared to life, its power a throbbing, vibrant promise of escape. Caleb did not hesitate. He threw the car into gear, and without turning on the headlights, he pulled out onto the dark, empty road, heading not west, toward Alabama, but east, back toward the lion's den. Their mission, he knew, had not changed. They had just lost the element of surprise. The hunt was now on, and they were no longer the hunters. They were the hunted. The decision to drive east, back towards the Vance homestead, felt like an act of collective insanity. Every instinct in Ilara's body screamed at her to flee, to put as many miles as possible between her son and the monstrous family that held him captive. But she looked at Caleb, at the calm, focused set of his jaw in the dim glow of the dashboard lights, and she saw not a madman, but a soldier executing a plan. The arrival of the sheriff's car had changed the tactical reality. Their window for a quiet, stealthy escape had closed. They're not just hunting us anymore, Caleb said, his voice a low, steady rumble over the roar of the engine as if reading her thoughts. They're hunting criminals. The sheriff will set up roadblocks on the main highways heading out of the county. To run now would be to run right into their arms. Our only chance is to do the one thing they won't expect. We have to go back. We have to finish this tonight before they have a chance to solidify their net. His logic was the cold, brutal logic of the battlefield. When you are outflanked, You do not retreat. You attack the enemy's weakest point, and their weakest point, he knew, was their own arrogance. They would be expecting a desperate flight, not a direct, audacious assault on their own fortress. He drove without headlights, navigating the dark, winding country roads with an uncanny skill. His memory of the route from his drive-in and a soldier's innate sense of direction, his only guides. They were a ghost car, a silent, dark shape moving through a sleeping landscape. The plan is the same, he said, his voice quiet but intense, but the timeline is accelerated. You still go to the house, you still surrender, but you have to do it now before the sheriff has a chance to organize a full-scale manhunt. You have to get there and convince them that you've been wandering, lost and terrified in the woods, that you've come to your senses. You have to make them believe that I am gone, that I was just a stranger who helped you in a moment of weakness and then abandoned you. The weight of the mission, the sheer, terrifying burden of the performance she was about to give, settled upon Ilara. She had to be more than just a defeated woman. She had to be a convincing, pathetic, and utterly broken one. Caleb parked the car in a deep, hidden grove of trees about a mile from the Vance estate. The rest of the journey would be on foot. He turned to her in the darkness of the car. "When you are inside," he said, his voice a low, urgent command, "you have to find a way to let me know that you are safe, that you are with your son, and that the men are in the study. You cannot use a radio. You cannot make a sound. You need to give me a visual signal." They devised a plan, a simple, silent, and hopefully effective one. The study, she had told him, was at the back of the house, its large bay windows overlooking the gardens. The curtains were always kept open. There was a large, ornate oil lamp on a table in that room. "When the time is right," he said, "when you are with Thomas and they are in that room, you will find a reason to go in there. You will accidentally knock over that lamp. The fire will be your signal. It will create a moment of chaos, of diversion. In that chaos, you will go to the pantry, you will kill the lights, and you will run." It was a plan of incredible, desperate risk, but it was the only one they had. He walked with her through the woods to the edge of the Vance property, the familiar high stone wall, a dark, menacing silhouette against the night sky. "They will have men watching the road," he said. "You have to go in from the fields. They will not be expecting that." Their farewell in the deep, silent darkness of the woods was freighted with a profound, unspoken emotion. He took her hand, his strong, calloused fingers wrapping around hers. "You are the bravest soldier I have ever known, Ilara Vance," he said, his voice a rough, heartfelt whisper. And then she was gone, a small, determined shadow melting into the darkness of the open fields, on her way to the final, desperate battle for her son's life. Caleb did not go to the back of the house this time. That was the exit route. His mission was to create and to secure that exit. He made his way, with his silent, ghostly grace, to a different part of the estate, the barns. He knew that Arthur Vance, in his fury, would have unleashed his dogs. He had heard them barking during their first escape. A pack of hunting dogs would be his most dangerous and most unpredictable enemy. He had to neutralize them. He found the kennels at the back of the main barn, a long, low row of chain-link cages. The dogs, a pack of 6 lean, mean-looking bloodhounds, erupted in a frenzy of barking and snarling at his approach. He did not try to silence them. He did the opposite. He used their own hunger against them. He had brought a small sack with him, containing the remains of their own meager meal from the road, a few scraps of bread and salted meat. He threw the food into their cages. The barking instantly stopped, replaced by the frantic, hungry sounds of the dogs devouring the unexpected feast. He had not just quieted them. He had, for a few crucial moments, bought their friendship, or at least their indifference. His next target was the estate's own generator, a large diesel-powered machine that he knew would be housed in one of the outbuildings. If he could disable it, he could ensure that when Ilara killed the main power from the house's fuse box, there would be no backup. The fortress would be plunged into a total and disorienting darkness. He found the generator in a small brick pump house near the well. It was a newer, more powerful version of the machine he had disabled at the mine in Prosperity, and he knew its weaknesses. He did not attack it with force. He opened the fuel line, letting the diesel fuel drain silently out onto the thirsty ground. The machine was now a useless, silent hunk of metal. His preparations were complete. He made his way to his final position, a spot in the deep shadows of a large magnolia tree at the edge of the formal gardens, a position that gave him a clear, unobstructed view of the back of the house and of the large, inviting windows of Arthur Vance's study. His hand rested on the cold, reassuring steel of his .45. He was a sniper in his hide, a soldier in his overwatch position. All he could do now was wait and trust in the courage of the woman he had sent into the heart of the enemy's camp. Inside the house, Ilara's return was a scene of high, brutal drama. She did not pound on the front door. She stumbled onto the back porch, her clothes torn and muddied from her journey through the fields, and collapsed against the kitchen door, her cries a perfect, heartbreaking imitation of a woman at the end of her rope. She was found by one of the household staff, a cook who had known her since she was a young bride. The alarm was raised and she was brought, a weeping, pathetic and seemingly broken figure, into the main foyer, where she came face to face, once again, with her tormentors. Arthur Vance, his face a mask of cold, triumphant fury, stood over her. The local sheriff was at his side, a look of grim, official disapproval on his face. "So," Arthur snarled, "the runaway returns? I hope you enjoyed your little adventure. Now you will face the consequences." "I am sorry," Ilara sobbed, her performance a masterpiece of abject surrender. "I was frightened. I didn't know what I was doing. That man, he left me. He took my money and he ran. I have been wandering in the woods all night. I am so sorry. I will do anything. Just let me see my son." Her story was a perfect, believable lie. It played to their every prejudice, their every assumption about her weakness, about her foolishness, about the predatory nature of the man who had helped her. The sheriff, a simple man who was inclined to believe the powerful, nodded, his suspicion of her now transformed into a kind of pity. Arthur Vance, his ego soothed, his victory now absolute and complete, was magnanimous. "You have caused this family a great deal of trouble," he said, his voice a low, condescending purr. "But you have learned your lesson. You will be confined to your room, and you will not see your son until you have demonstrated a proper and lasting sense of gratitude and obedience. Take her upstairs." His two sons, Jed and Luke, grabbed her by the arms, their grips hard and brutal, and began to drag her toward the main staircase. This was the one part of the plan that Caleb had not and could not have anticipated. She was not being given a moment alone. She was being taken under guard to a new prison. As they dragged her up the stairs, a new, desperate plan began to form in her mind. She had one chance, one moment to create the diversion she needed. As they passed the landing, a place adorned with the proud ancestral portraits of the Vance family, she acted. With a sudden, violent and completely unexpected surge of strength, she threw her body sideways, crashing into a large, ornate and deeply unstable mahogany side table. The table and the massive, heavy porcelain vase that sat upon it, a priceless family heirloom, went crashing to the floor in a deafening, spectacular explosion of shattered wood and porcelain. In the ensuing moment of chaos, of the two brothers' shocked and furious surprise, she wrenched herself free from their grasp. She did not run up the stairs. She ran down. "Thomas!" she screamed, her voice a raw, primal and utterly convincing cry of a mother's unhinged grief. "I want my son!" She ran, not toward the front door, but toward the back of the house, toward the study, the one room she knew she had to get to. She burst into the room just as Arthur Vance, who had been following the procession from below, was entering it. The oil lamp, her target, her signal, was on the table, its flame a warm, inviting beacon. With a final, desperate and seemingly hysterical act, she swept her arm across the table, sending the lamp and a dozen other objects crashing to the floor. The glass chimney of the lamp shattered, and the oil and the flame spilled out onto the thick, dry, and incredibly flammable Persian rug. The room erupted in a sudden whoosh of flame. The signal had been given. The fire in the study was an act of magnificent, desperate, and brilliant improvisation. The flames, feeding on the spilled kerosene and the dry, ancient wool of the Persian rug, erupted with a hungry, explosive roar, instantly filling the room with a thick, acrid smoke. The scene in the grand house, which had been one of controlled, triumphant order just a moment before, devolved into absolute primal chaos. Arthur Vance, who had been standing in the doorway of the study, recoiled from the sudden blast of heat, his face a mask of shocked disbelief. His sons, Jed and Luke, who had been halfway down the stairs in pursuit of Ilara, turned and stared, their minds unable to process the sudden, violent turn of events. The fire, in the space of a single chaotic second, had become the new and absolute center of their universe. From his vantage point in the gardens, Caleb saw the sudden, brilliant orange bloom of the fire in the study window. It was the signal, but it was not the controlled, strategic signal he had been expecting. This was a conflagration, a wild, uncontrolled event. He saw the flicker of running figures inside the house. He heard the first, faint, panicked shouts, and he knew, with a soldier's grim, immediate certainty, that the plan had gone terribly, horribly wrong. Ilara was not in control. She was in the heart of a disaster she had created, but he was a soldier, and a soldier's job is not to question the chaos of the battlefield, but to adapt to it, to exploit it. He had his orders, and so did she. His were to wait for her at the back door. Hers were to get the boy and to get to that door. He had to trust that she was still fighting, that she was still moving toward her objective. In the smoke-filled, chaotic inferno of the house, Ilara was a ghost, an avenging angel, her movements fueled by a pure, undiluted, maternal adrenaline. She did not run from the fire. She used it. The smoke was her cover, the panic of her captors, her greatest weapon. As the Vance men stared, mesmerized and horrified, at the flames that were now beginning to lick their way up the heavy, velvet curtains, she slipped past them, a shadow in the swirling smoke, and ran up the grand staircase. She knew where they were keeping her son. The nursery, the room with the iron grill on the window. She reached the second-floor landing, the air already thick and difficult to breathe. The door to the nursery was locked, as she had known it would be. The key, she knew, would be in Arthur Vance's pocket, but she had a key of her own. She pulled the small, sharp pocket knife Caleb had given her from her dress. She was not a locksmith, but she was a desperate mother. She jammed the tip of the blade into the old, simple lock, and with a strength born of pure, unadulterated will, she began to twist, to pry, to attack the mechanism. Below her, the chaos was escalating. She could hear the shouts of the household staff, the sound of a woman screaming, the futile, pathetic sound of a bucket of water being thrown onto the now raging fire. She could hear the angry, impotent bellows of Arthur Vance, his kingdom, his fortress, literally burning down around him. The old lock, thankfully, was no match for her desperate, furious assault. With a final, satisfying crack, the metal gave way, and the door swung inward. Thomas was huddled in a corner of the dark room, his small body trembling, his face pale with a terror that was beyond tears. The smell of the smoke was now thick in the room. "Mama," he whispered, his voice a small, fragile thread of sound in the growing chaos. "I'm here, my love," she said, her own voice a calm, reassuring anchor in the storm. She scooped him up, his small, warm body a precious living weight in her arms. "We're going home." She did not go back the way she had come. The main staircase, she knew, would be a death trap of smoke and panic. She went the other way, down the narrow, winding and seldom used servants' staircase at the back of the house, a route she knew from her own lonely and unhappy childhood explorations of the great, forbidding house. She emerged on the ground floor, near the kitchen, the part of the house that was still, for the moment, relatively free of smoke. The pantry and the fuse box were just a few feet away. This part of the plan, at least, was still viable. Carrying her son, she ran into the pantry. She did not need a light to find the main breaker. Her hand found the large, cool, metal lever in the darkness. She took a deep breath. She thought of Caleb, waiting for her on the other side of the door, and with a final, definitive, and deeply satisfying act of rebellion, she pulled the lever. The second blackout was as sudden and as total as the first. The few remaining lights in the house, the ones that had not yet been shattered by the heat of the fire, were extinguished. The only light now was the wild, angry, and deeply, beautifully chaotic orange glow of the fire in the study. She ran to the back door, the same door she had used in her first escape. It was unbolted. She threw it open, and the clean, cool, and blessed night air rushed in, and he was there, a solid, reassuring presence in the darkness, his pistol in his hand. He did not speak. There was no time. He took the boy from her, and the three of them ran, not to the wall this time, but toward the deeper, more anonymous darkness of the barns and of the woods that lay beyond. They looked back only once. The Vance homestead, the proud, arrogant, and unconquerable fortress of a brutal dynasty, was a pillar of fire against the black Georgia night, its destruction a beautiful, terrible, and deeply, profoundly just sight. They reached the safety of Caleb's car an hour later, their bodies aching, their lungs raw from the smoke, but their spirits were soaring with a wild, triumphant, and incredulous joy. They had done it. They had walked into the lion's den. They had stolen its most precious treasure, and they had, in the process, burned the den to the ground. As Caleb drove them away, this time heading west toward the safety of Alabama, toward the promise of a new life, the glow of the fire was visible for miles, a funeral pyre for a cruel and corrupt world, and a beacon of hope for a new one. They arrived back in Haven's Rest 2 days later, a weary, battle-scarred, but victorious army of 2, and a small, rescued boy. Sarah Johnson welcomed them with tears of joy and a prayer of thanks, her quiet, unshakable faith a final, comforting benediction on their long, dark journey. The news of the fire at the Vance homestead and of the miraculous, unexplained disappearance of the patriarch, Arthur Vance, and his 2 sons, who were all presumed to have perished in the blaze, was a brief, sensational story in the Atlanta papers, and then it was forgotten. The world, in its own careless, indifferent way, had moved on. The Vance dynasty was over. In the quiet, peaceful sanctuary of Haven's Rest, a new and better story was just beginning. The small, makeshift family of Caleb, Elara, and Thomas began the slow, quiet, and deeply healing work of building a new life. The ghosts of their past were not gone, but they were at last quiet. Caleb returned to his work at the garage, his hands, which had so recently held a gun in a desperate fight for survival, now finding a new, more peaceful purpose in the honest, productive work of mending broken things. Elara, for the first time in her life, was just a mother, her days filled not with fear and with struggle, but with the simple, joyful, and profoundly sacred rhythms of raising her son. But they both knew that their story was not yet over. Elara was a woman who was, by right of a justice she had forged in a fire, now in possession of a piece of land that held a secret and valuable treasure. And Caleb was a man who knew how to build things. The quiet, peaceful interlude in Haven's Rest was not an ending. It was a beginning. It was a time of planning, of healing, of gathering their strength for the final and most important phase of their mission, the building of a future. They had been brought together by an act of brutal, inhuman cruelty, but they had discovered in the crucible of their shared struggle a bond of love, of trust, and of a deep, unshakable, and mutual respect. They were 2 survivors, 2 soldiers who had, against all odds, won their war, and now they were ready to build their peace. The months that followed their return to Haven's Rest were a time of profound and necessary healing. The small, quiet town, with its gentle rhythms and its deep, unassuming kindness, was the perfect balm for their wounded souls. The trauma of their ordeal did not simply vanish, it receded, its sharp, terrifying edges softened by the daily routines of a normal, peaceful life. For the first time in his young life, Thomas was just a boy, free to run and to play in the sun-drenched Alabama fields, his nights no longer haunted by the fear of the dark, locked room. His laughter, a sound that Ilara had feared she might never hear again, became the joyful, constant soundtrack to their new existence. Ilara, too, began to heal. The hypervigilance, the constant low-grade terror that had been her companion for so long, began to dissipate. She learned to sleep through the night again. She found a quiet joy in the simple domestic tasks she shared with Sarah Johnson, in the easy, comfortable companionship of a woman who had become a mother to her in all but name. She was discovering a new version of herself, a woman who was not defined by her fear or by her fight, but by her capacity for love, for joy, for the simple, profound, and deeply satisfying work of creating a home. Caleb watched this transformation with a quiet, profound sense of satisfaction. He had been a soldier for so long, a man whose life had been defined by conflict, by destruction. To be a part of this process of healing, of rebuilding, was a new and deeply fulfilling kind of mission. He worked at the garage, his hands finding a familiar, comforting solace in the logic of machines. And in the evenings, he would return to the small, warm, and love-filled house, to the makeshift family that had become the quiet, unexpected, and deeply cherished center of his world. But even in this peaceful sanctuary, Caleb knew that their story was not yet over. They were not just survivors, they were the custodians of a future that was buried in the rich, red clay of Ilara's 100-acre farm in Georgia. The land and the valuable deposit of kaolin clay that lay beneath it was a resource, an opportunity, a chance to build something new, something that would be a testament not to the greed and the cruelty of the Vances, but to their own values of justice, of community, of a quiet, dignified self-sufficiency. He began to plan, his engineer's mind working with the same quiet, methodical precision he had once used to plan a military campaign. He spent his evenings at the small local library, reading everything he could find about mining, about geology, about the industrial uses of kaolin clay. He wrote to old army buddies, men who had gone on to become engineers and surveyors, asking for their advice, for their expertise. His plan, when he finally presented it to Ilara, was both simple and audacious. They would not sell the land. They would not lease the mining rights to a large outside corporation who would simply come in, strip the land of its resources, and leave a scar on the earth. They would develop it themselves. They would start a small, independent, and community-focused mining and processing operation. "We have the land," he said, his voice quiet but full of a powerful, infectious enthusiasm as they sat on the porch one evening, the fireflies beginning to light up the twilight. "We have the resource, and we have the knowledge, or at least we can get it. We can do this, Ilara. We can build something of our own, something that is clean and honest and that belongs to us." It was a terrifying, exhilarating idea. For Ilara, who had spent her entire life in a world where business was synonymous with a brutal, patriarchal, and corrupt form of power, the thought of entering that world on her own terms was daunting. But she looked at Caleb, at the quiet, confident strength in his eyes, and she believed him. She had seen him do the impossible. She had seen him walk into the heart of a fire and emerge unscathed. She knew that with him at her side, she could do anything. They decided to return to Georgia, not as fugitives, but as founders. Their return, a year after they had fled in the dead of night, was a quiet, deliberate, and deeply symbolic act of reclamation. They did not return to the world of the Vance family, a world that had, in any case, ceased to exist. They returned to their own small corner of it, to the 100-acre farm that was now their own, their promised land. The first year was a struggle. The land was fallow. The farmhouse was in a state of near ruin. They lived a simple, almost brutally Spartan existence, pouring every ounce of their energy and the small, carefully managed funds from Ilara's settlement into the slow, painstaking work of building their dream. Caleb was the heart and the mind. of the operation. He was a force of nature, a one-man army of ingenuity and relentless hard work. He repaired the house, he cleared the fields, he built a new barn with his own 2 hands. And he began the slow, arduous, and highly technical work of setting up their mining operation. He did not have the capital for heavy industrial equipment, so he invented his own. Using his knowledge of hydraulics, he designed a simple but brilliant system for mining the clay, a process that used high-pressure water jets to separate the soft kaolin from the surrounding earth, a method that was far less destructive to the land than traditional strip mining. He built his own processing plant, a small, efficient, and largely automated system of settling tanks and drying beds using salvage parts and his own custom-designed machinery. It was a masterpiece of frugal, ingenious, and sustainable engineering, and it was a testament to a different way of doing business, a way that was based not on brute force and a contempt for the earth, but on a deep, intelligent, and respectful partnership with it. Ilara was the soul of the operation. She was the one who managed the books, who negotiated with the local suppliers, who built the relationships with the small independent potteries and paper mills that became their first customers. She discovered that she had a sharp, shrewd, and surprisingly ruthless business mind of her own. She was no longer the timid, subservient woman who had been terrorized by her father-in-law. She was a business owner, a leader, a woman who knew her own worth and the worth of the product they were creating. But their enterprise was more than just a business. It was a community. They hired their first employees from the ranks of the dispossessed, the forgotten people of the rural Georgia countryside, black sharecroppers who had been cheated out of their land, poor white farmers who had lost their farms to the banks. They did not just offer them a wage, they offered them a partnership. They created a cooperative, a system where every worker owned a small share in the company, where every voice was heard, where the profits were shared, and where the dignity of labor was the highest and most sacred of principles. Their small, independent, and strangely radically idealistic company, which they called New Ground Minerals, began to thrive. Their kaolin was of such a high quality, and their business practices were so honest and so fair that they began to build a reputation. They were the small, David-like upstart in a world of Goliaths, and their success was a quiet, powerful testament to a different, better way of doing things. Their family thrived too. Thomas grew into a strong, intelligent, and deeply compassionate young man, a child of 2 worlds who had inherited his mother's fierce, resilient heart and his stepfather's quiet, honorable soul. He worked on the farm, he learned the business, but his true passion was for the land itself. He went on to study agriculture, just as his biological father had dreamed of doing, and he returned to the farm with new, innovative ideas for sustainable farming, for crop rotation, for the healing of the red Georgia earth that his ancestors had so carelessly and so brutally exploited. Caleb and Ilara's love story was the quiet, steady, and nourishing ground from which all of this grew. Theirs was a partnership of true equals, a bond that had been forged in the fire of a shared, desperate struggle, and that had been tempered into a thing of profound, beautiful, and everlasting strength. They were 2 people who had been thrown away by the world, but who had, in a small, forgotten corner of it, found in each other and in the rich, red earth a new and better and more hopeful ground on which to build a life. They had not just survived their past, they had transformed it, turning a legacy of violence and of greed into a future of justice, of community, and of a quiet, enduring, and deeply, profoundly beautiful peace. The success of New Ground Minerals was a quiet revolution in the hard-scrabble landscape of rural Georgia. It was more than just a profitable business. It was a living, breathing testament to a different set of values. In a region where the economic order had always been a brutal top-down hierarchy, landowner over sharecropper, company over worker, their cooperative model was a radical act. It was a declaration that a business could be both successful and humane, that profit did not have to be extracted from the sweat and the suffering of the powerless. The company grew, slowly, organically, and with a deep-rooted integrity that was a direct reflection of its founders. They never expanded beyond their means. They never took on debt from outside investors who would try to change their way of doing things. Caleb, with his engineer's mind, was constantly innovating, finding new, more efficient, and more environmentally sustainable ways to extract and to process the clay. Ilara, with her shrewd business acumen, found new markets for their high-quality product, building a network of loyal customers who were drawn not just to the quality of the kaolin, but to the story and the values of the company that produced it. But the most profound impact of new ground minerals was on the community that grew up around it. The families who worked for them, the families who had once been the landless, powerless, and invisible population of the county, were now stakeholders in their own future. They were homeowners, their children were well-fed and well-educated, and they were citizens of a small, thriving, and fiercely proud community. The farm itself became the center of this new world. Ilara and Caleb built a small community hall, a simple but beautiful wooden structure which served as a school for the children, a meeting place for the co-op, and a social hub for the entire community. It was a place of shared meals, of lively debates, of music, of a simple, powerful, and deeply interconnected human life. They had, without ever intending to, created a kind of utopia, a small, isolated pocket of justice and of decency in a world that was still rife with the old poisons of racism and of greed. They were a beacon, a small, steady light that demonstrated a different, better way of being. But a light, no matter how bright, also attracts the attention of the darkness. Their success did not go unnoticed. The large, powerful, and deeply entrenched mining and manufacturing interests in the state, the corporate heirs to the same brutal, exploitative system that the Vance family had once embodied, began to see new ground minerals not as a curiosity, but as a threat. Their cooperative model was a dangerous idea. It challenged the fundamental and highly profitable assumption that workers were a disposable commodity. Their sustainable mining practices were an implicit rebuke to the strip mining and the chemical pollution that were the standard and highly lucrative practices of the industry. And their very existence, a small, successful, and integrated community of black and white workers, was a profound and deeply unsettling challenge to the rigid racial hierarchy upon which the entire Southern economic and social order was built. The attacks began subtly. A state inspector, a man with known ties to one of the large mining corporations, began to make weekly, harassing visits to their operation, searching for non-existent code violations. A local bank, under pressure from its powerful corporate clients, suddenly and inexplicably cancelled their line of credit. Their trucks began to be stopped and searched by the local and notoriously corrupt county sheriff for no reason at all. It was a war of attrition, a slow, steady, and systematic campaign of harassment designed to bleed them dry, to strangle their small enterprise in a web of bureaucracy, of intimidation, and of a quiet, systemic, and perfectly legal form of economic warfare. Caleb and Ilara knew who was behind it. It was a man named Harrison Croft, a name that was eerily similar to the one that had haunted another of their battles, a man who was the CEO of Consolidated Minerals, the largest and most ruthless mining corporation in the state. Croft was a man in the mold of Arthur Vance, a man of immense inherited power, a man who saw the world as a zero-sum game, a man who would crush any and all competition by any means necessary. He had made a quiet, informal offer to buy new ground minerals a year earlier, and Ilara had politely but firmly refused. He was not a man who was accustomed to being refused. The final and most dangerous front in Croft's war opened with the arrival of a slick, well-dressed lawyer from Atlanta. He delivered a legal notice. Consolidated Minerals was suing New Ground Minerals for patent infringement. They claimed that the innovative, water-based mining process that Caleb had invented was, in fact, a violation of a patent that their company held. It was a complete and utter fabrication. Caleb's process was his own, a unique and brilliant piece of engineering he had created from scratch. But the lawsuit was not about the truth. It was a weapon, a tool designed to crush them. Croft knew that they did not have the resources to fight a long, protracted legal battle against his army of high-priced corporate lawyers. He would bury them in motions, in depositions, in a mountain of legal paperwork, until they were either bankrupt or forced to sell. The community was terrified. The fragile, prosperous world they had built was under attack. They held a meeting in the community hall, the air thick with a familiar and deeply unwelcome sense of fear and of helpless dread. But Caleb and Ilara were not the same people who had once fled in the dead of night. They were veterans of a long and brutal war, and they were not going to surrender the peace they had fought so hard to win. Caleb stood before his friends and his neighbors, his face calm, his voice a steady, reassuring anchor in the storm of their fear. "We have faced down bullies before," he said, his gaze sweeping over the faces of the men and women he had come to call his family. "We have stood in the fire, and we have not been burned. This is not a fight about a patent. This is a fight for the soul of this community. This is a fight for our right to exist. And it is a fight we are not going to lose." He and Ilara had a plan. It was a long shot, a desperate and incredibly risky gamble, but it was the only one they had. They knew they could not win the fight in the corrupt local courts. They had to change the battlefield. They had to take the fight to a new and unexpected arena. Their plan was to bypass the legal system entirely and to go straight to the source of Croft's true power, his shareholders. Consolidated Minerals was a publicly traded company, and its shareholders, Caleb and Ilara knew, were not all ruthless, profit-at-any-cost capitalists. Many of them were ordinary people, pension funds, church groups, people who had invested their money in what they believed to be a solid, reputable American company. They decided to launch a proxy battle. It was a complex, arcane, and usually incredibly expensive legal maneuver, a way for a group of shareholders to challenge the company's management and to propose their own resolutions at the annual shareholders' meeting. They did not have the money to hire a fancy Wall Street firm to wage this battle for them, so they did it themselves. Ilara, with the help of a young, idealistic, and deeply underpaid public interest lawyer from Atlanta, began the painstaking work of identifying and contacting the shareholders of Consolidated Minerals. She wrote a letter, a simple, powerful, and deeply personal account of their story. She told of the community they had built, of the values they stood for. She told of Croft's ruthless, predatory attack on their small, independent enterprise, and she did not just ask for their sympathy. She made a powerful and deeply compelling business case. She argued that Croft's slash-and-burn and legally questionable business practices were not just immoral, they were a long-term liability for the company. They created labor unrest, they invited government regulation, and they were, in a world that was slowly beginning to awaken to the costs of environmental destruction, a profound reputational risk. She proposed a shareholders' resolution, a simple, revolutionary, and deeply, powerfully American idea that Consolidated Minerals should adopt a new corporate charter, a charter that would require the company to adhere to the highest standards of environmental sustainability, of worker safety, and of corporate social responsibility. It was a radical, almost laughably idealistic proposal, but it was a proposal whose time had come. Her letter and the story of the small, brave, and deeply ethical company that was being crushed by a corporate giant began to resonate. It was picked up by the press, and the story of the David and Goliath battle between Newground Minerals and Consolidated Minerals became, once again, a national story. Pension fund managers, church leaders, and small individual investors who had for years been the silent, passive owners of the company began to ask questions. They began to see that their own money was being used to fund a brutal and deeply un-American campaign of corporate thuggery. The climax of their campaign came at the annual shareholders meeting, a grand, theatrical affair held in the ballroom of a luxury Atlanta hotel. Caleb and Ilara, with their small ragtag delegation of farmers and miners, were there. They were a stark and powerful contrast to the sea of dark, expensive suits that filled the room. When the time came for Ilara to present her resolution, she walked to the podium, a small, unassuming woman in a simple, homemade dress. She was not a polished, charismatic CEO. She was a mother, a farmer, a survivor, and she spoke, not in the language of finance, but in the simple, powerful, and deeply, profoundly human language of the heart. She told her story, she told their story, and she made a simple, powerful, and unshakable appeal, not to their wallets, but to their consciences. "We are not asking you to sacrifice your profits," she said, her voice clear and strong, ringing out in the silent, cavernous room. "We are asking you to invest in a different and a better kind of profit. A profit that is not measured in dollars, but in the health of our land, in the dignity of our workers, in the future of our children. We are asking you to invest in a company that you can be proud of. We are asking you to help us build a new ground for all of us." Her speech was a sensation. It was a moment of pure, unadulterated, and deeply, profoundly moral truth in a world that had forgotten the meaning of the word, and it was a moment that changed everything. Ilara's speech was not a business presentation, it was a sermon. In the sterile, air-conditioned ballroom, a space dedicated to the cold calculus of profit and loss, she had spoken of values, of community, of conscience. She had held up a mirror to the assembled shareholders of Consolidated Minerals, and she had forced them to see the human cost of the numbers on their quarterly reports. For a long, stunned moment after she finished, the room was utterly silent. The sea of dark suits, the men who ran the financial world, were momentarily at a loss, their usual language of stock options and market projections useless in the face of this simple, powerful, moral challenge. Harrison Croft, who had been sitting on the dais with his board of directors, his face a mask of smug, confident contempt, was the first to recover. He rose to the podium, a condescending, dismissive smile on his lips. He was a master of this world, a man who knew how to handle a public relations problem. "I thank Mrs. Washington for her passionate, if somewhat naive, remarks," he began, his voice a smooth, confident purr, designed to soothe and to reassure. "We at Consolidated Minerals, of course, share her commitment to the well-being of our communities, but we also live in the real world, a world of competition, of market forces, of a fiduciary duty to you, our shareholders, to maximize your return on investment. This resolution, for all its high-minded sentiment, is a recipe for financial disaster. It is an attempt by a small and frankly irrelevant competitor to use emotion and innuendo to disrupt our business. I urge you to reject this emotional outburst and to vote in favor of a sound and profitable future." He had made a fatal, arrogant mistake. He had tried to frame the debate as one of emotion versus logic, of naive idealism versus hard-nosed realism. But Ilara's speech had not been just an emotional appeal. It had been a moral one, and in that room there were more decent, honorable people than he had ever imagined. The first to speak was a small, elderly woman in a simple tweed suit, a woman who looked more like a grandmother than a corporate raider. She was the comptroller for a large and powerful teachers' pension fund. "Mr. Croft," she said, her voice quiet but carrying a surprising, steely authority, "the teachers I represent are not just interested in a profitable future, they are interested in a livable one. They are interested in a world where our children can breathe clean air and drink clean water, and they are not interested in a profit that is earned by crushing small, honest, and innovative companies like New Ground Minerals. Our fund will be voting in favor of the resolution." Her statement was a cannon shot. One by one, other shareholders began to stand up. A young, fiery priest representing the investment portfolio of his diocese. A stern-faced, blue-collar man, a representative from a major labor union's pension fund. They all spoke the same language, a language that Croft did not seem to understand. They spoke of ethics, of responsibility, of a long-term vision that was not just about the next quarter's profits, but about the next generation's future. The vote, when it was finally taken, was a stunning, historic, and utterly unprecedented landslide. The shareholders' resolution passed with an overwhelming majority. The small, radical and idealistic charter that Ilara and Caleb had drafted in their small farmhouse kitchen was now the official, legally binding mission statement of one of the largest and most powerful corporations in the state. Harrison Croft sat on the dais, his face a mask of stunned, ashen disbelief. He had been defeated, not by a hostile takeover or a market collapse, but by a quiet, simple and powerful idea. He had been brought down in his own ballroom by a woman in a homemade dress, a woman who had dared to speak the truth. His reign was over. Within a month, he was forced to resign as CEO, his ruthless, profit-at-any-cost philosophy now a liability in the new, more conscientious corporate world that he had, so ironically, helped to create. The victory of New Ground Minerals was a story that resonated far beyond the borders of Georgia. It became a landmark case, a touchstone for a new, emerging movement of socially responsible investing, a movement that was just beginning to understand the immense untapped power of the shareholder to effect positive change. Ilara and Caleb, who had only ever sought to protect their own small community, had almost by accident become national heroes, symbols of a new, more hopeful and more humane form of capitalism. They did not, however, embrace their new role as public figures. They quietly, gracefully and firmly refused the invitations for television interviews, for book deals, for speaking tours. They had won their war, and now all they wanted was to return to their peace. They went back to their farm, to their community, to the quiet, purposeful, and deeply satisfying life they had built. Their victory had secured their future and the future of their company for generations to come. The harassment stopped. The lawsuits were dropped. New Ground Minerals was no longer an embattled renegade upstart. It was now a respected and highly profitable model of a new kind of business. The years that followed were a golden age for the small cooperative community. The profits from the company were poured back into the community, funding a new library, a small but excellent medical clinic, and a scholarship fund that sent a new generation of the county's brightest and poorest children to college. Caleb and Ilara grew old together, their love a quiet, steady, and beautiful constant in a world of change. They were the beloved, revered, and deeply respected elders of the community they had founded. Their home was a place of pilgrimage, a place where people from all over the country would come, not to see the heroes of a great corporate battle, but to see a simple, powerful, and deeply inspiring example of a life well lived. One day, a young, ambitious MBA student from Harvard University came to the farm. He was writing his thesis on the New Ground Minerals Cooperative, on its unique and highly successful business model. He spent a week with Caleb and Ilara, interviewing them, studying their operation, trying to distill the secret of their success into a neat academic formula. On his final day, he sat with them on their porch, his notebook filled with data, with production figures, with profit margins. "It's an incredible model," the young man said, his voice full of a genuine intellectual excitement. "Your efficiency, your productivity, your profit-sharing system, it's a revolutionary paradigm of stakeholder capitalism. I think you may have discovered the formula for a perfect business." Caleb, who was now an old man, his hands gnarled with the arthritis of a lifetime of hard, honest work, looked at the young man, a slow, gentle, and deeply wise smile on his face. "Son," he said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble, "I'm afraid you've missed the point." The young man looked at him confused. "The point? But my data. This has never been about business," Caleb said, his gaze drifting out over the green, peaceful fields of his farm to the small, thriving community that was his life's true work. "And it's certainly not perfect. We've made 1,000 mistakes. We've fought. We've struggled. We've almost lost everything more times than I can count." He looked at Ilara, who sat beside him, her hand resting in his, and the love that passed between them was a tangible, beautiful thing, a quiet, powerful, and enduring light. "This," he said, "is not a business model. It is a family. It is a community. It is a group of people who decided a long time ago that the most important thing you can build is not a fortune, but a life of dignity, of respect, of a simple human decency. That's the only formula there is. All the rest, it's just noise. The young man was silent, his pen still. He was a man of numbers, of data, of the cold, hard logic of the marketplace. But in that moment he understood that he had been given a lesson that he would never find in any textbook. He had been given a glimpse into a different and a better kind of wisdom. He had been shown the soul of the machine. He went back to Harvard, and he wrote a thesis that was not just about business, but about the profound, transformative, and deeply, beautifully human power of a community that had, against all odds, decided to build its own new and better ground. The final years of Caleb and Ilara's life unfolded with the gentle, quiet grace of a long and beautiful sunset. The great battles of their past had receded, becoming the stuff of legend, the foundational myths of the community they had built. Their days were no longer filled with the high drama of struggle and of conflict, but with the simple, profound, and deeply satisfying rhythms of a life well lived. Their home, the farmhouse that had once been a dilapidated ruin, was now a warm and welcoming and deeply lived-in place, its walls saturated with a half-century of love, of laughter, and of a quiet, purposeful peace. It was the heart of a sprawling, multi-generational family, a family that was bound not just by blood, but by a shared history of courage and of a deep, abiding loyalty. Thomas, their son, had become the man his two fathers, the gentle, dreaming Daniel and the strong, honorable Caleb, would have wanted him to be. He had taken over the management of the farm, his innovative, sustainable practices turning it into a model of a new, more hopeful kind of agriculture. He was a quiet, thoughtful, and deeply respected leader in the community, a man who had inherited his mother's fierce, protective heart and his stepfather's calm, unwavering moral compass. His own children, Caleb and Ilara's grandchildren, grew up in a world that their grandparents had literally built from the ground up, a world where the values of justice, of community, of a deep respect for the land and for each other were as natural and as essential as the air they breathed. Caleb and Ilara, in their old age, became the town's beloved and slightly eccentric elders. They were the keepers of the story, the living embodiment of the community's history and its values. They would spend their afternoons on their wide, comfortable porch, a constant reassuring presence, as the life of the community they had created flowed around them. They would watch the children playing in the fields. They would offer quiet, wise advice to the young farmers and the workers from the co-op. They would sit in a comfortable, companionable silence, their hands clasped, their love a quiet, steady, and beautiful constant in a world of change. Caleb, his body now frail, his powerful hands gnarled with arthritis, was no longer a builder of machines. He became a builder of a different kind. He spent his final years in his workshop, a place that had become a kind of sacred museum for the town, and he began to write. He was not a learned man, not a writer, but he had a story to tell. He began to document his own life, his childhood in the segregated South, his experiences in the war, his long, improbable journey to this small, peaceful corner of Georgia. He was writing not for fame, not for posterity, but for his grandchildren, for the future generations of the community, so that they would know in his own simple, honest words the story of their own beginning, the story of the fight that had won them their peace. Ilara, for her part, became the town's gardener, its nurturer, its quiet, spiritual heart. The gardens around their farmhouse, which she had first cultivated with her own two inexperienced hands, had become a thing of breathtaking, legendary beauty, a sprawling, vibrant, and deeply personal expression of her own love for the land. She would spend her days among her flowers, her hands in the rich, red earth, her face lit with a quiet, serene, and deeply contented joy. She was a woman who had once been a prisoner in a gilded cage, a woman who had been tied to a post and left for dead. And she had found, in the simple, honest, and life-affirming work of nurturing a garden, a final and profound kind of freedom. One beautiful, clear spring morning, Caleb passed away peacefully in his sleep. his long, honorable, and extraordinary life coming to a quiet, gentle close. His passing was not a moment of tragedy for the town. It was a moment of profound and deeply grateful celebration. The entire community and people from all over the state and from all over the country who had been touched by his story came to the small, humble farm to pay their last respects. They did not hold a funeral in a church. They held a memorial service in the community hall that he and Ilara had built, a place that was a living testament to his life's work. The service was not a somber, mournful affair. It was a joyful, raucous, and deeply moving celebration of his life. People stood up one by one and told their stories. The old miners, their faces weathered and creased, spoke of the quiet, courageous soldier who had given them back their dignity. The young engineers and the farmers, his former students, spoke of the brilliant, patient teacher who had given them their future. And his grandchildren spoke of the kind, gentle, and deeply loving man who had been the quiet, steady, and unwavering center of their world. Ilara, his partner, his love, his comrade in arms for over half a century, was the last to speak. She stood before the assembled crowd, a small, frail, but still fiercely, luminously beautiful woman. She did not speak of the hero, of the legend. She spoke of the man. She spoke of his quiet humor, of his unwavering integrity, of the simple, profound, and deeply, deeply decent human being he had been. Caleb was a soldier, she said, her voice clear and strong, ringing out in the silent, crowded hall. But his greatest battle was not fought in a war or in a junkyard or in a courtroom. His greatest battle was the one he fought every single day, the quiet, lonely, and courageous battle to be a good man in a world that was often anything but. He was a man who was thrown away by the world, but he did not become bitter. He did not become hateful. He simply began to build a new one, a better one, and he invited us all to come and live in it with him. She looked out at the faces of her friends, of her neighbors, of her family, of the community that was his true and lasting monument. He is not gone, she said, a slow, beautiful, and deeply, profoundly peaceful smile on her face. He is here. He is in the foundations of this hall. He is in the clean water we drink. He is in the bright, hopeful faces of our children. He is in the quiet, steady, and unbreakable bonds of love and of respect that hold this community together. He was a builder, and what he built will last forever. Ilara lived for 5 more years, a beloved, revered, and deeply cherished matriarch. She spent her final years in the quiet, peaceful solitude of her garden and in the warm, loving embrace of her family. She oversaw the final posthumous publication of Caleb's memoirs, a simple, powerful, and deeply moving book that became a quiet, unassuming, and beloved classic of American literature, a testament to a forgotten hero and to a forgotten chapter of the nation's history. She was buried beside him under the great ancient oak tree on their farm, their 2 simple graves a quiet, humble, and deeply, profoundly beautiful testament to a love that had, in its own quiet way, changed the world. Their story was not a fairy tale. It was a story of pain, of struggle, of a deep and abiding and often brutal injustice. But it was also a story of a profound and an even more powerful and an even more enduring hope. It was the story of 2 people and of a community who had been thrown away, but who had, in the ruins of their old lives, found the courage, the strength, and the love to build a new and a better ground for all of them. And in doing so, they had left behind a legacy that was as simple, as powerful, and as eternal as the earth itself. The story of a good and a decent and an honorable life. Your generous support through Super Thanks ensures that the flame of these powerful memories of hope and the triumph of the human spirit will never be extinguished. Thank you.